So Paul Joseph Watson is a conservative YouTuber, and he recently made a video about a woman who thought she didn't want a kid, then she realized she did want a kid, but she'd left it too late. To start with, I wanted to say why I'm making this video. So the reason I'm making this video is because I think as more people start to engage with antinatalism and antinatalist philosophy, I think more accusations are going to be thrown at antinatalists as misguiding people to make a decision that they will live to regret, i.e. convincing them that they don't want kids or that having kids is unethical, and then they decide not to have kids, and then actually later in life they think, actually I did want to have kids, or I do now want to have kids, and the time has gone for them to have biological kids, and they live to regret that. I've already seen murmurs of this kind of accusation online, and I think it's only going to become more common to be launched at antinatalists as this becomes a bigger issue in society, which I think it probably will do with birth rates declining, but also as antinatalism becomes more well known. So I wanted to react to this video by Paul Joseph Watson just to give my honest thoughts on what I think about the situation this woman is in, and also his reaction to it, and where antinatalism fits into this. And very quickly, before we get into it, I've not included every single bit of his video. I'm just including specific parts I want to comment on. If you want to see the whole video, the link is in the description.
Approaching her 39th birthday, Melissa Persling has finally realised she's been lied to for years.
I wrote a lot of that article, like, truly scared. Like, I really did think, like, wow, you've missed your opportunity. Like, you are going to be alone. You're not going to have a family. I was really scared when I wrote that.
She wrote an essay for Business Insider titled, "I'm 38 and single and I recently realised I want a child. I'm terrified I've missed my opportunity." Tragically for her, despite marrying a traditional man when she was 22, at the time she felt strongly I did not want children, that I wasn't going to be like the traditional housewife. I knew I did want to pursue a career. What could possibly go wrong? She ended up getting divorced at 30 and only now has come to this jarring realization.
The downfall of living a selfish, me-focused life. It's definitely started to feel hollow and meaningless.
So the first thing I want to identify is how antinatalism relates to this, right? So this phenomena of people who are realizing later in life that they actually do want biological kids and then not being able to have them, this is something that at least seems to me to be becoming more common, or at least it's getting more exposure on social media. The first thing I want to say is that this has little to no relevance to antinatalism. Like, the vast majority of people who this is happening to, it is not as a result of them becoming convinced of antinatalist philosophy, rejecting procreation on ethical grounds, and then later coming to change their mind. This is not as a result of antinatalist philosophy. This is something that is happening in the world independent of antinatalism. Maybe there are one or two isolated cases where antinatalism has been involved, but even if antinatalism didn't exist in the minds of even the small amount of people it does exist in the minds of, this would still be going on if all else were still the case. The second thing I wanted to say is the motivations that this woman seems to be saying were her motivations for deciding previously not to have biological children seem to be motivated to further her own desires. Now, what I want to point out is that that has nothing to do with antinatalist philosophy. When someone decides not to create someone else for antinatalist reasons, it is specifically concerning the individual that they would have created. So I wanted to lay that out there, the distinction between this phenomena that's going on already independent of antinatalism, and also in this woman's specific case, she wasn't motivated for antinatalist reasons not to have biological children.
You know, it's taken me to this point in my life to realize that that's not a life that's going to bring you happiness.
Melissa finally woke up and came to the understanding that she'd been a victim of the antinatalist PSYOP.
So I quickly want to make a note on Paul Joseph Watson talking about an antinatalist PSYOP. Now, this is something that is probably going to become more common, and it is relatively common, at least in conservative circles already, when the word antinatalist is being used completely differently from how actual antinatalists use it. So him referring to an antinatalist PSYOP, what I can glean from this is that he thinks that there is a group or specific individuals out there that are trying to influence people to have less children, but in a covert way. And when I say covert, I simply mean they're not just directly telling them don't have kids. Maybe that is part of it as well, but the example he gives on screen is an issue of Time magazine where it talks about the child-free life. And it says, when having it all means not having children. Now, this clearly is completely irrelevant to antinatalist ethics or philosophy. If he was going to be speaking more accurately, he'd be calling it a child-free PSYOP if it is a PSYOP at all. And when he says PSYOP there, he means psychological operation. Essentially, it's this term used to refer to some sort of operation that is going on to try and manipulate people's psychology, and it causes some sort of change that the person who is launching the PSYOP would prefer in society. Anyway, whilst this is something as antinatalists we're going to want to push back against, I think this conflation of the term antinatalism with this more sort of conspiratorial narrative about trying to get people to have less children in some sort of underhand manipulative way, all we can do is push back against it and make clarifications where we find it.
I don't want to wake up at 60 by myself and go, well, I had a lot of fun. It's like I want to wake up 60 next to the love of my life, raising a family, doing the things that are really important and the things that really matter. I don't think you're going to be on your deathbed one day and look back and go, I wish I went to more parties.
I wanted a simple life with children and home-cooked meals, she said. However, Purslane, despite coming from a religious Christian background, made it clear to her husband-to-be that she did not want children. Big mistake. But also, what on earth was he thinking? Never mind, don't marry. Don't ever even waste your time dating a woman who says she never wants children. Whenever you hear this,
I don't want kids.
Just think of this. Run away fast, disengage, ghost, block, do whatever it takes. Just get the hell away as quickly as possible. Oh, but I can change her. I can convince her. Dude, she's a victim of weapons-grade algorithmic brainwashing.
So it's kind of hilarious here that Paul Joseph Watson is trying to make out that anyone who doesn't want children, or I think specifically any woman who doesn't want children, is the victim of some sort of manipulation. Like she didn't come to that decision on her own. When all throughout history, there's been a significant minority of people, including women, who have just not had the biological drive to want to reproduce. There are many people out there, they're not a majority obviously, but there are many people out there who just don't want kids because they don't feel the need to have a kid. They're not the victim of a psychological operation. One thing I just thought of while I was editing, this whole idea of a PSYOP, even if we assume it's true, it's not uniquely an antinatalist PSYOP. There are many governments around the world who, as a result of declining birth rates, are engaging in many activities to get people to have more children. Now, they don't seem to have been successful, but there are many initiatives around the world in places like Japan, South Korea, European countries.
Kan sex redde Danmarks fremtid? Danmark har et problem. Fødselsraten er den laveste i 27 år, og der fødes ikke nok børn til at forsørge den aldrende befolkning.
Det frigør endorfiner i hjernen, og så får folk lyst til sex. Det får vi børn af.
Deltag i konkurrencen. Do it for Denmark.
The things that Paul Joseph Watson agrees with, no comment. But when it's something he doesn't agree with, oh, it's a PSYOP, it's a PSYOP. Like, it just seems to me like such an unnuanced way of viewing the world. Drawing attention only to the people behind the scenes who are trying to do the things you don't agree with, when these sorts of tactics and these sorts of initiatives are used by everyone. Now, that's not to say that I believe this stuff is true, but given that there are declining birth rates across the developed world, is it more likely, and have we seen more initiatives by governments and other groups to get people to have more or less children? I'll let you decide that for yourself. This is what happens when you spend way too much time online. Yes, some people will make decisions that they will live to regret in the future, and they could be decisions that are quite fundamental to their life. This happens all the time in so many aspects of people's lives, not just the decision to have kids. People get married to the wrong people. People invest large amounts of money in the wrong thing, and then they lose all their money. People make mistakes based off things that they haven't thought about deeply enough, or that they will just change their mind on in the future all the time. But there is a big group of people in the world that simply don't want children, and it's not that they've all just fallen victim to being misled by a PSYOP.
So potent that it's overridden her hardwired core genetic coding. She's broken permanently. Just run. But it's not just women's fault that relationships in the West are in such a perilous state. Young men's brains have been totally scrambled too, primarily due to hookup culture and dating apps.
So I think we're far enough in the video where I think I should probably just give my general thoughts on this whole thing. So some of the things that he's saying, I actually am sympathetic with. I don't necessarily think that dating apps are for everyone and they will cause a lot of people to have poor mental health. It's the same as social media. Some people will use it responsibly and benefit from it and even find a long-term partner out of it, dating apps or social media. But there are also many negative impacts. Like social media and dating apps do actually seem to be some sort of not intentional but just real-time social experiment to see how humans react to these things. These are platforms that we have not evolved to be on. They are very different from how we normally interact with people. They allow us to dehumanize each other. And personally, I don't use dating apps. I'm not a fan of them. They don't vibe with me. I do use social media. I do think it has some benefits and it has benefited my life, but I also recognize the downsides. So I can agree with some of the things he says. I also agree that long-term happiness is probably not going to be secured by diving headfirst into consumerism and using all of the money that you would have spent on raising a kid simply indulging yourself. Obviously, self-indulgence to some degree and engaging in consumerism to some degree is not necessarily going to have a negative impact on your long-term mental or physical health. But engaging in those things to excess is going to lead some people, as it seems to have with her, feel hollow and like they haven't actually got any real meaning in their life. And that actually comes to the next thing, meaning. So obviously the angle here that Paul Joseph Watson is taking is that children are a great sense of meaning and they are a great endeavor you can embark on in life, and the people who don't do that are missing out. He's using her as a case study of that. But to me, he just seems like a bog standard salesman for the Procreational Ponzi scheme. What he's essentially saying is, oh, you can't find meaning in your life. You've got problems in your life because you can't find meaning. Well, I know how to solve that for you. Just have a kid. Well, the first thing to say, that's not how real life works. Yes, it may work for some people, or maybe even many people will have a child and that will give them the prolonged sense of meaning in their life. But that doesn't work for everyone. You can't decide who your kid is going to be, how they're going to behave, what your relationship is going to be like with them. You can influence those things, but you can't just turn some dial to a specific setting and say, that's how I want to have my kid. That's how I want to have a relationship with them. And everything's hunky-dory. And also creating someone else so that you can have a sense of meaning is simply just distracting yourself from the fact that you can't create meaning in your own life. So all you've done now is engaged in the Procreational Ponzi scheme where, because you couldn't find meaning in your life, you've just created someone else and burdened them with the task of finding meaning in their life. And they're going to pop someone else out and carry on this Ponzi scheme. There are many, many ways you can get meaning in your life. And don't get me wrong, for a lot of people, having a child is one method of doing that. But creating a mini-me isn't the only way you can do that. You can live your life in service of others, helping others, making the world a better place, doing good in the world, being part of a community. All of these things are massively rewarding and enriching for someone's life and give them a great sense of meaning. And I think rather than Paul Joseph Watson just sort of making an example of people who have lived to regret a key decision in their life, rather than promoting a Ponzi scheme and simply burdening the next generation with the same sense of meaning seeking that we have, he could propose other healthy ways of finding meaning in your life. Provide a plethora of examples and avenues for finding meaning rather than popping someone else out so that they have to tread the same road that you did. Anyway, those are my general thoughts on this promotion of the sort of procreational Ponzi scheme and creating meaning by creating someone else who's going to need to find meaning themselves. I think it's a self-centered way to solve the problem that you clearly have in your life, a lack of meaning, and there are ways to work around it.
I feel unbelievably betrayed by feminism. I was constantly fed this idea that women can do everything. We don't really need men. Women can have the great career and have the kids that they like and change the tires and do this. I got that from so many of the women in my life too. A lot of like the older women in my life. What hell did you mean by that? Such a lie.
And also one thing I want to say, if it's not clear already, is I do have sympathy for this woman. Like, it's not nice to realize that from your point of view, you've made a massive mistake in your life and now you're going to have to live with that. Even though I'm opposed to the act that she is now wanting to do, I can still recognize that she is personally in a shit situation. And another thing, when she was saying that she was lied to by feminism and that she can have everything she wants, I don't know what experience she's had and what exposure she's had. So I don't know specifically what she's referring to, if there was specific people or just general influences on her. But obviously it is the case that you can't have everything. There are trade-offs in life. Like, we have a limited amount of time, limited amount of energy. Every decision we make, we are taking one thing over another. And so it would be wise to keep in mind that when you make decisions, you want to make decisions with your long-term happiness and fulfillment and sense of meaning in mind.
Don't be a Melissa Purslane. Don't indulge the misery-making merry-go-round of dating apps and hypergamy. Life is so short. Don't waste time. And don't leave it too late.
I agree and disagree with him. Like, I disagree that people should be procreating to fill that hole that is their desire for a sense of meaning. That is just continuing a Ponzi scheme. Where I agree with him is don't leave things too late. Make decisions that are going to be good for your long-term future. If that is raising a child, invest money and build resources up early on so that later on you have the financial resources to be able to adopt a child or be with someone who already has children and help raise their children. Make sure you surround yourself with people who value you and make sure that you have a sense of community. Make sure that you find something that you can do that you find fulfilling. Learn, build emotional intelligence, exercise. All of these things are part of a well-rounded, balanced life that can bring you great meaning and purpose. Anyway, those are my thoughts on what Paul Joseph Watson said. I think this is going to be an accusation that is leveled at antinatalists more and more in the future. Simply standing your ground and saying, no, I don't think procreation is ethically justifiable. I think that creating someone else so that you can have a sense of meaning is simply putting the burden on them and continuing a procreational Ponzi scheme. And that if you're in a situation where you feel like you need to create someone so that you can fill the hole that is your lack of meaning, you clearly have bigger issues and need to explore all the avenues available to you to be able to build meaning in your life. Anyway, let me know what you thought of what Paul Joseph Watson said and my thoughts on what he said, and I will see you in the next one.